our reality is that our economy is in great difficulty. The budget drawn for the 2022 fiscal year, that is this year, has been thrown out of gear, disrupting our balance of payments and debt sustainability, and further exposing the structural weaknesses of our economy. We are in a crisis. I do not exaggerate when I say so. I cannot find an example in history when so many malevolent forces have come together at the same time. But, as we have shown in other circumstances, we should turn this crisis into an opportunity to resolve not just the short-term urgent problems, but the long-term structural problems that continue to bedevil our economy. I'm able to report to you, my fellow Ghanaians, that the negotiations to secure a strong IMF program, which will support the implementation of our post-COVID-19 program for economic growth, and additional funding to support the 2023 budget and development program, are at advanced stages and are going well. We're determined to secure these arrangements quickly to bring back confidence and relief to Ghanaians. We're working towards reaching a deal with the IMF by the end of the year. This will give further credence to the measures government is taking to stabilize and grow the economy, as well as shore up our currency.
Welcome on the big stories on the AM show. And of course, as you guessed, we're going to tear apart, slice and dice what Mr. President said, what he got right, what maybe he did not get right, and whether this entire, address gave hope to the nation. Well, we're talking about the economic crisis, and the president has announced some measures to mitigate that self-same situation. We'll be joined by our guests on this self-same matter. Former Minister of Finance, Seth Terkper, joins the conversation. We also have Dr. John Osai-Kwapong, a CDD fellow. We also have Dr. Daniel Appiah, a political governance and public administrations expert with the University of Ghana Business School. All of them join us. Good morning, gentlemen. I know you're in different time zones, but I'm addressing all of you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning to you and to your viewers.
Yeah, great. Let's go for the jugular. No wasting time here. Seth, what did you make of Mr. President's address yesterday? What are your key takeaways? Just briefly, what are your key takeaways? And were you convinced that on the back of what he was saying, our economy would soon be on sound footing?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the most positive thing is His Excellency admitting for the first time in the most emphatic manner he could that the economy was in trouble. I stand for correction, but I do not think that as head of state he has been that forthright, with Ghanaians. But having said that, then one was expecting, excuse me, and we do not expect the president to go into every minute detail, but I think he gave us an indication, of how long it will take to get us at the roots. And that for me is the most important thing. 6 years, which seems to also suggest the path to debt sustainability. Remember that there were 2 IMF staff visits to Ghana. One was data gathering, the other was preparation for the negotiations, followed by the first round of negotiations. And then the World Bank president did indicate that was a mistake not to have done the suspension. The head of Africa, of IMF, was very clear that it was up to Ghana to bring a plan, and one that includes debt, sustainability, a plan towards debt sustainability. Maybe we may be seeing the 6 years as, the context of discussions of the situation in which we are and the period it will take. That is 2 years, to the end of the current administration, plus another 4 years. I say this in the context that most programs we have done have been 3 years plus an extension in some cases of only 1 year, that is 4 years. So that would be, my brief take. But I'm afraid the most disappointing is lack of detail in expenditure, and we can come to that. Expenditure is the main reason for many of the problems that we have now.
Thank you for those brief comments. Let me come to you, Dr. Akakpo. So for you, what are your takeaways from the president's address from yesterday? And were you convinced that this will end us, out of the woods?
Well, so I've been one of those who have been advocating that a direct engagement with the public from the president would be a good thing. Since the announcement that we were going to the IMF and the subsequent Q&A document that was released by the Minister of Finance, I felt that there was a bit of a communication gap. And so I strongly was one of the voices that said it would be nice to hear from the president to fill in that gap, to let us know that, how things are going, but more importantly, to also let us know that he feels the pinch points of the citizens. So in that regard, I think I was happy that the announcement came out that the president was going to speak with the nation. In terms of my key takeaways, I think for the first time in a very forceful way, the president did admit that we face economic crisis, and so that was. That was a plus. At least, the first step towards addressing any problem is admitting that there's one. And so it was good to hear the president say, we do face some serious economic crisis. I think it was also good for the president to try and communicate the idea that, quote unquote, we are all in this together. Now, as to what that means in practical terms, the choices that we have to make going forward, he did allude to a number of steps that can be taken to get us out of this, most of which were long term. But I think in situations of crisis, people want more, quote unquote, short term, immediate relief solutions, that kind of a thing. But the kind of situation that we find ourselves in, I don't even think the government has any fiscal space.
Are you suggesting, pardon the interruption, are you suggesting
Yes.
that the president's address yesterday wasn't true to the times? In other words, it wasn't relevant in this moment?
No, I think it was relevant. It's just that in terms of the preferred solutions, most of it were long term. And yes, we do have some long term structural issues that we have to deal with. I think for me, my key takeaway now is I think we just have to wait for the 2023 budget to see precisely the actual actions that will be taken over the next year. The other thing that my other takeaway would be, he talked about the IMF deal hopefully being struck by the end of the year, which was a good clarification point because over the weekend on Newsfile, the Deputy Majority Whip had indicated that the negotiations will be done and would be incorporated into the 2023 budget by November 15th, which made me, sort of ask, is that really what is going to happen? And so, again, with the president, saying by the end of the year it will be concluded, I'm assuming that it won't be, as immediate as the next 15 days to be incorporated. But for me now, it's the 2023 budget that I'm waiting for to see more specific actions that will be taken in the immediate term.
Let me come to you, Dr. Appiah. Same, your quick reflections on yesterday's address.
Right. So I was happy that the president addressed the nation. And also on top of the things that I took away to be positive is the admission of the president that we are in crisis and emphasizing that he does not exaggerate when he says that we are in crisis. think everyone knows that we are in crisis, but up to this point, the admission that we are in crisis and we will need both short, long, and medium-term measures to address the crisis had not been forthcoming. And so I was very happy to hear the president admitting quite forcefully that we are in crisis. I think the second thing that I find also positive from the address is the admission of the president that going to the IMF for the bailout is only going to help us to address the short-term economic problem, the short-term financial crisis that we find ourselves in, and that we will need medium to long-term measures to address our structural problems. As to whether the solutions that he gave really will address the medium to long-term problems that we face is another thing that I think that we will discuss. I think if, for instance, the president and the IMF are going to wait on the finance minister to deliver a budget, let's say in November, as one of the conditions of the negotiations, then I am afraid, looking at last year, what happened to the budget process when it was thrown out of parliament and reinstated, I am afraid that that may not be achievable. And so, as I said, in terms of even the short, medium, and then long-term solutions to the crisis that we find ourselves in, I am not really certain that the solutions that he gave really, apart from going to the IMF with the negotiations, I don't think that the rest of the solutions really will bite hard enough. Perhaps maybe in terms of the solutions, regulating the financial markets and trying to deal with the black market is one of the quick win areas that they can actually focus on. But I think we will come to the issues about 1D, 1F, free SHS, and then the fact that the solutions will run until 2028. Running to 2028 means that we will need an inclusive hands, we will need all hands on deck. It means that the solutions go beyond the current administration so that we don't have to focus on a more partisan kind of approach to dealing with the problems. So I think these are my takeaways from the president's submissions.
Let me go back to Seth Terkper. You have occupied that very hot seat of finance minister. And I think everyone in this country knows that Ken Ofori-Atta is feeling that heat as well. But interestingly, Mr. President, while admitting that we are in a crisis and that he's not exaggerating it, quickly adds, I cannot find an example in history, and I'm quoting him here, when so many malevolent forces have come together at the same time. But as we have shown in other circumstances, we shall turn this crisis into an opportunity to resolve not just the short-term urgent problems, but the long-term structural problems that have bedeviled our economy. Let's focus on those malevolent forces, because obviously he talks about COVID-19, he talks about the Russo-Ukrainian war, and then he talks about those who are talking down the city. Let's take away the talking down of the city for now. Were you surprised that Mr. President went down that road again, talking about COVID-19 and the Russia-Ukraine war?
Yes, I was. In the first place, the fund is not coming from a very ignorant position in dealing with this. In 2019, the IMF did its Article 4, 2019, and that was a turning point for Ghana. In that document, the IMF revised our deficits for 2018 and 2019 to 7.0% and 7.2%. But we kept insisting that our deficit, was for those respective years, I believe 4.5 and 5.3. The fund had moved on. And that is because the fund started adding the bailout costs, which were being added into footnotes in calculating the deficit and in calculating, the debt. That was a major adjustment. Then COVID struck in 2020. Yes, I think one of the dangers we have had, or issues, let me rather say, with this government is belittling past crises. Yes, COVID may have been the severest of crises, but don't forget there was a global financial crisis. We had our own crisis with crude oil supply. from Nigeria. We had the tariff-bearing issues, the accumulation of all the fall in crude oil prices in 2015 when we did a budget with $99 and ended up with $30, dollars, and we had to do cuts. But you can also go back to the bushfires, of the Rawlings era, where they quantified. Did anybody, maybe now we are able to quantify these things properly and we know the cost. You can go to the droughts that plagued the Akufo administration, which led to Bui Dam being brought to the books to save, and then in our case, thermal plants. So we have had crises. I think the most important thing is that this administration stopped structural measures, the buffers, like the stabilization fund, the sinking fund, stabilization fund buffer for the budget, sinking fund to help reduce the rate of borrowing so that as we borrow, we pay. We wanted to take the heritage fund, which is savings, not just for future generations, but shoring up the reserves, in a more permanent, fashion. 3 oil fields, we never beefed up any of this. Nearly 200,000 barrels per day compared to 70,000 barrels, which was not even achievable. But let me come to COVID. Yes, we did have serious crisis, but no government, and let me emphasize, no government in our history has had $6 billion US dollars, I'm not talking cities, bequeathed to fight one crisis. Let me give you examples. IMF COVID loan, 1 billion. SDR, 1 billion. Bank of Ghana, 1.7 billion. Our own stabilization fund, initial 250 million, as we speak, it has reached, almost 400 or surpassed 400, million. World Bank, almost, 1 billion. If you add African Development Bank, that is 1 billion. You add this up, and we are talking about something close to 6 billion, if not over 6 billion, to tackle the crisis. Did we miss an opportunity to use all these flows to do a significant correction, especially when the COVID report, of March 2020, and it's there for anybody to go and check. There's a table there, which was repeated from 2019, showed that we were sitting on a fiscal gap of 3 to 6%, right? It's there. It started from the Article 4, and some things are not new. Part of the solution for those were gold monetization. That's a Japan. Levies, which is e-levy. After we are done, they are there. Maybe the economists can start looking at this so that we have a better understanding. So the other major disappointment is to continue saying that everything was rosy up to 2019. No, they were not. Because these two reports show a fiscal gap which the government needs to fill. And we got the 6 billion. Remember, 6 billion plus 3 billion before we couldn't go to the market, of bonds up to 2020. So that's about 8 billion. And we couldn't use it to do a correction. So that's the extent to which I'm surprised, to, come to the situation, that, what is facing us is unprecedented. Yes, there is a feature of uncertainty and a feature of, the situation being unusual, and one isn't running away from that. But just imagine the significant flows. No government had gotten more than 1 billion US dollars to do a correction. All the 17 IMF programs that we did. The one that came closest, 915 million, was the John Mahama, Honorable Mahama, His Excellency Mahama's, UCF, which the current government took over and got about 1/3 of that IMF money actually flowing into the economy, in addition to the crude oil prices, the buffers which I mentioned into 2017, which was a source of growth. If you doubt, you can see the source of growth was mainly oil. Non-oil growth has always been flat. We miss opportunity to use these massive resources, our own internal resources like oil, and the largesse from the World Bank, IMF, and the rest of 6 billion, plus our own borrowing of bonds. What else do you need, to do a correction? So this is what is missing. And I would hope that, we would start facing these realities. What is taking up, just to conclude, what is taking up all of this? It is the expenditure. We started borrowing heavily to support free SHS. And mind you, last year, Bank of Ghana...
But free SHS doesn't take that much money. I mean, looking at what it has swallowed or consumed over the years, it's just a drop in a bucket compared to our other expenditures. So when you say we've been borrowing to finance free SHS, how exactly do you mean?
Well, if all these funds that came in, remember SDR, it's not a loan, remember our own borrowing and the rest. And I'm saying that, and that's the point I was coming to, are not enough to support the government's own budget to the point where, as we speak, apart from the 10 billion Bank of Ghana gave in 2020, Bank of Ghana has financed 22 by mid-year, in the mid-year review, 22 billion Ghana cedis of the 37 billion deficit that the government, that's 2/3 of the deficit. It's on the shoulders of Bank of Ghana. So yes, we may blame, speculators and the rest, but the resources, and remember what was Bank of Ghana financing? It includes debt service because the revenue coming in was enough to pay on the compensation and interest. And so the forest component that, is included in that financing, and that was depleting, the reserves because the budget was not bringing in money to meet those commitments. And that is 2/3, right? So we'll see the percentage that Bank of Ghana financed. And remember, this is a country which by 2016 had done zero financing, not taking a penny from Bank of Ghana to finance the deficits. That's how we ended 2016. And it's there, the records are there. So we do have significant problems, and we can only, make a headway.
Okay.
If we talk about expenditure as well.
All right. Let me bring in Dr. Appiah. From where you sit, I've been quoting Mr. President. He says, we are determined to restore stability to the economy and provide relief. We are all in this together. And I'm asking for your support to rescue Ghana from the throes of this economic crisis. He then re-echoes the fact that his administration does not know how to bring back the dead, but they know how to restore the economy, to rejig the economy, bring it back to life. But looking at the measures we've put in place, looking at what Mr. President said, hinted at, will that suffice to do what he says will happen, aka restore our economy?
Right, thank you. We are in this together, and clearly, if you look at some of the measures that he proposed to deal with it, for instance, that there will be a new property rate regime. And so a new property rate regime is certainly going to affect property owners, and property owners are expected to contribute to solving the crisis. Also, he talked about the fact that the GRA, that's the Ghana Revenue Authority, is going to improve revenue mobilization. Once again, the ordinary Ghanaian is expected to help contribute to the solutions by paying taxes. And then he talked about also the fact that the ministries, departments, and agencies should be ready for 30% cut on discretionary expenditures. And so businesses are going to be affected. The ordinary person is going to pay more taxes. Ministries, departments, and agencies are also going to suffer. Now, this certainly shows that we are all in this together. But on the other side, what is the presidency offering to solve the problem? He talked about the continuing cut in the 30% of the salaries of ministers, the president, the vice president. And if the 30% cut in the salaries of ministers and then the president, vice president is something that will help to deal with the problem, I think it would have helped long ago, because this is not something new. And so I think that the solutions that he talked about, much of the effects that he kept emphasizing is going to be on the ordinary Ghanaian property owners, businesses, ministries, departments, and agencies. But I don't think that he did enough in terms of what the government is offering to deal with the problem. For instance, before the crisis, we all knew that the free SHS program was a major contributory factor to the crisis that we all face. And up to date, many schools are having problems with feeding, school feeding, and all that. And so one would have expected that the president, having mentioned free education twice in the address, would have said something about what he was going to do about the free SHS program to help deal with the financial crisis that we find ourselves in. He talked about also the using 1D, 1F program to make up for import substitution of products like toothpicks and then all that. But hey, IMF money is not for industrialization. IMF money is not for 1D, 1F program. So where is he going to get the money for this import substitution kind of measures that
is that to say that point he made was not realistic in economic terms?
It's not realistic in economic terms at the end of the day, because from the COVID-19 that we went through and the support that was given to the 1D, 1F program, one expects that the president will have gone to the detail of telling us exactly how the support given to the 1D, 1F program, the import substitution measures that they embarked upon has actually helped to contribute to improving the economy. And if those were very serious and credible measures to improve the economy, we would not have been in this kind of crisis. And then if we also look at the solution in terms of the finance minister going to prepare and then present a budget, in preparation for or towards this IMF kind of negotiations, you ask yourself whether the finance minister has got the credibility and then the influence to get the support of parliament to accept the budget. And I do not see that happening in the short term. The president talked about the fact that he wants a quick solution to this kind of problem, but he's heading towards another storm in parliament, and it's more likely to take a longer time for both sides of the house to agree on the budget. If it's likely to take a longer time, then is it realistic for him to say that he wants a short deal with this IMF program, and it's likely that we will finish this IMF negotiations in December? I do not foresee that happening. And so I think that it is better that he also listens carefully to the numerous calls, at least to restructure and reshuffle his government, at least to bring some credibility to the negotiation table. And I didn't hear him touch on that aspect. So I think much of the measures is more focusing on the Ghanaian expecting to go through a tougher and a harsher economic environment. Right. But the president, I think, offers better in terms of what the government is actually offering to deal with the problem.
Staying on that trajectory of we're all in this together, Mr. President also says, I hear from the market queens also that another factor fueling the high prices is the high margins that some traders are slapping on goods for fear of future high costs. He goes on to tell them that we're all in this together. Let us be measured in the margins we add. And he even goes to the extent of saying that he is refraining himself from calling them any names. But in this regard, and what he calls for, I don't know how realistic may be price regulation. Remember the days of Kalabule and price regulation. Can we do that? Can we implement a regime of price regulation in these times? Because some people have also said that, look, those who are producing local rice, for example, what substantiates their slapping high costs on their rice? But then there are also the realities of a lot of imported goods. So where do we draw the line?
I think in terms of the measure in terms of price regulation, market regulation, it's also raised my doubt as to whether this democratic laissez-faire regime is capable of dealing with that. Of course, the only side that I think that the government can deal with is clamping down the black markets and then tightening financial regulation to prevent capital flight. He mentioned the fact that, of course, when it comes to our oil and gas revenue, now you have to go through a local kind of account. That one, I think, is within their purview. But price regulation, that sounds more militaristic. I mean, I do not really think that at the end of the day, the government has got I mean, when I talk about the government, this system of government that we practice is capable of regulating prices on the market. And so that's why he appealed to the market women to try and then not to hike up prices. So on the one hand, he's talking about price regulation, but on the other hand, appealing to the market women. And so it's more of an appeal to market women than the government being really capable of regulating prices on the market. And so much should come from rather the government side in terms of maybe cutting down the number of ministers, cutting down expenditure to deal with the problem.
So, Mr. President, and I'll address this to Dr. Kwapong. Mr. President also says, look, it is clear that you have a government that cares. First of all, did you get an impression from all that was said? Because people have said that they expected more from Mr. President. For example, cutting down, trimming down ministers and taking other radical measures, which they did not see. Did you get that impression that government really cares and wants to get us out of this abyss, so to speak? And secondly, talking about pensions and the fact that, even if there will be no haircut in the first place and all of these sums of money, deposits will not be affected. How comforting was that for you, looking at the sector and what we've been told in the past that we should expect a crude haircut?
I think it was very important on the question of the haircut to send that signal, because I think prior to that, there had been a lot of conversations in the public and concerns, questions about what was going to happen to those who had made investments in government bonds, securities, treasury bills, things like that, right? And so out of those concerns, then you cannot see the kind of action that it could possibly drive people into. Do I take out my investment? Do I keep it? Am I okay? Am I not safe? And that doesn't create a very also stable investment environment. So I think it was very, very important that the president forcefully came out and said, there will be no such thing, right? So hopefully that would be reassuring to individuals with investments, other institutions, pension houses that have investments in these instruments. Hopefully that will be very reassuring to them. At the end of the day, though, beyond the reassurance, people also do read the signs. And when I say people do read the signs, they take a look at various reports that come out, whether it's reports from the central bank, whether it's all the data points that may come from, let's say, inflation reports from statistical services, things that the Ministry of Finance may put out. So beyond those words of reassurance, there are also the realities that come through the economic indices and other indicators that people also do pick up, putting it all together to then make that decision that, okay, I think we are safe, I'm on solid ground, I have nothing to worry about. Or they could also say, thanks for the reassurance, but the numbers still don't give me confidence. So, but again, ultimately, it's a good thing that the president forcefully said, do not worry. Hopefully that will be backed by, whatever numbers to come out, the state of the economy as we go ahead. So that for me was very important to do. And your previous question again.
So I asked about, I think you've addressed that question in the first place. So I was asking about the pensions as well and how they would be affected. And then I segued that into the haircut bit.
Okay. Right. Because again, I mean, if you think about, all of these investments, if people are supposed to take a haircut on such investments, the implications for the institutions, the implications for pension houses, the implications for individuals who invested in some of these instruments as a way to save, as a way to secure their future. So for me, again, hopefully it would those words of assurance would calm people down and not sort of the panic would go down. Let me put it that way.
Just a follow-up question, and I'll put that question to Seth Tekwe as well. He he also painted the picture that, look, inflation is hitting all of us across the world. So don't fail to appreciate what you have in Ghana. And here's the picture. He says, look, the highest rise in government borrowing in 50 years is what we're experiencing. The highest rise in inflation for 40 years. He adds that between the end of 2019 and now, inflation in Ghana has increased 5-fold. In Togo, by 16-fold. And in the Ivory Coast, by 7-fold. Saying that don't fail to appreciate what you have. Just last week, I was in Togo, and trust me, buying there, I don't think I felt the pinch the way I feel it in Ghana. But that is just me. Maybe I'm not feeling the 16-fold as much as I am feeling the 5-fold in Ghana. But take a look at this. When you look at the annual inflation, Turkey now stands at 83.4%, Argentina 83%, the Netherlands 14.5%, Russia 13.7%, and this is Russia that is at war. Italy 11.9%, India, South Africa 7.5%. If you look at our West African neighbors, none of them seems to have an inflation as high as ours. So is this something we're missing that the president and his economic team are seeing, something we are failing to see?
And you see, at the end of the day, as they always say, all politics is local. So the art of comparison is great. Putting things in a comparative perspective is also, has its place in moments of crisis, right? To say that, look, what you're going through is not unique to Ghana, right? That other places are facing challenges as well. I live and work in the US. We are facing our own challenges. But I remember raising the challenges that we are facing in the US and saying, this is Joe Biden's economy. And a friend of mine saying, well, the whole world is in crisis. And I remember my response to him was, I understand, but this is where I earn a living. This is where I buy food. This is where I buy petrol. This is where I pay my taxes. It is in the same vein that whilst you can appreciate that comparative analysis that says others are facing crisis as well, and it's a global phenomenon, at the end of the day, I think the Ghanaian can only speak of their Ghanaian experience and where they feel the pinch points.
Right.
And that's where, for me, I think the more of the emphasis of the speech should have been, which is the local pinch points that are being felt and the specific actions that will be taken to address those local pinch points, even as we acknowledge that there is a global crisis going on. Because at the end of the day, we go to the market in Accra, Medina, Kumasi, wherever. So it is those local pinch points that people are complaining about, and they de-emphasize that comparative aspect of what is happening in other countries.
And to come to you, Seth, on that, I want you to be brief because I have a follow-up for you. But just to contextualize it, those pinpoints that Dr. Kwapon speaks of, even when you look at our kitty, while some will say that even the way we measure our inflation is problematic, the likes of Professor Steve Hang, look at some of the things we consume a lot. Rice. I go on the market and I sometimes just ask, if you look at the percentage increases for some of these products, it's over 200%. You look at chicken, you look at oil, which has moved from around 500 and something cedis to 1,200 cedis per gallon. You look at all of these and you realize that it's not so simple to just say that our inflation is here when you focus on certain items in the basket. But your quick reaction to that, Mr. Tekpe.
Well, thank you very much. And I think His Excellency mentioned this, period we are in comparison with 30, 40 years ago. In Ghana, when we talk about 30, 40 years ago, we are talking about pre-GRP SAP era. That is what we must, understand. Next year is the 40th anniversary of the launch of the Economic Recovery Program and Structural Adjustment Program. And you would agree with me that we have had our ups and downs, including 17 IMF programs, but never have any of those situations brought us to this point. And when we are making these comparisons, I recall fondly being when we were reminded that, when our debt was rising, that even the UK, had debt of 100% and whatever we could, then we cautioned. that you are no UK. They have the pound sterling, the others have the euro, others have the dollar, you have the cedi, and you must play, according to your size. So it's worth remembering that before this point, our debt had crossed 80%. Before this point, our deficit was anything between 13 to 15%. And so if you are doing comparisons, with even neighbors, you may want to go back 2-3 years and see where they were compared to the current situation. Yes, nobody is denying that the current situation, is it's not it's not a major factor. Yes, it is, but I'm saying that the habit of blaming everything on what is going on around us without we delving into our difficulties and problems,
Right.
and admitting. But a quick one, if I may, just a quick one. Property taxes. I think we have to be careful. Property taxes have been the mainstay of local government, from the colonial era. And you are saying that you are therefore going to take a major source of revenue for our MMDAs, and bring it, to the national level, maybe share it with them at a time when you've already capped since 2017 the DACF, and they have been deprived, they owe arrears. So we should be careful that in preferring one solution, we are not creating
Right.
other solutions, because those assemblies, I can tell you, and I've been an assembly member, nominated, not appointed, and I know the situation, on the ground pages and the work that those monies do, for them. So I think we should be careful with some of the solutions that are being proposed, just like the e-levy, which after all is just one of 13, levies, that are on our books today and are distorting our ability, to have a less distortionary tax regime and a simple one that
Okay.
will enable GRA administer the taxes more efficiently.
Right. I want to come in with my follow-up very quickly. Mr. President says that his government is working to secure reliable and regular sources of affordable petroleum products for the Ghanaian market. Of course, for me, in my entire living years in Ghana, I have never seen prices this high. Diesel is almost, it's practically just the peswa away from 20 cedis, and petrol, fuel save is somewhere around 18 cedis, 17 cedis in some places. It depends on where you're going. But let's set that aside briefly. Let's talk about the exchange rate. I want us to take a critical look at that. I have a quote here from the vice president in 2012, where he says, the government is blaming speculators for the fall in the cedi instead of tackling its depreciation. So speculation. Now, fast forward today, or yesterday to be precise, we had Mr. President say, fellow Ghanaians, as the French would say, l'argent n'aime pas le bruit. To wit, money does not like noise. Sika impedidi. Where there is chaos, where there is noise, where there is unrest, you will not find money. How apt was this statement of Mr. President? Briefly on that.
Well, the chickens have come home to roost. That's all I can say. Because yes, it was easy to be making those statements. But as my President Mahama said, if you have not been in the seat, maybe you. So the reality is now setting in, and I would hope that the consensus that is required, because the situation we are in now, we all know, is far worse, than those, that were described back, in 2012. And remember in 2012, I remember very well that, my immediate boss, Dr. Dufo, said something similar, that money doesn't like noise. It was a big, graphic headline, So yes, this is a standing truth. And I think in terms of speculators and the rest, again, we can go back into ERP SAP. We can go back into, if some of those measures like price controls and the rest, were sustainable, I don't think we would have the current, market-based policies that we have, because they were tried. And what we have is a compromise. There are some controls through utility price controls, subsidy, and the rest. But the truth is that, let me give you one example. The vehicle that was put in ESLA for subsidy has been collateralized as part of the collateralization of ESLA. And so we don't have, that money to provide, the subsidy. It's pure and simple. The strategic stock experiment that we started, like the US, Doc was talking about US measures and the rest, and the thing about US is they have their buffers. Yes, they may have their problems. We started those buffers. I mentioned sinking fund, stabilization fund, and all those. Those are the structural things that you need. Yes, then it gets to a point like this one where you can implement certain measures, but as just, ad hoc measures. And that's why ESLA was supposed to be, to last just 3 to 5 years, just as the temporary import duties or the national or fiscal stabilization levies that has been implemented from the Rawlings administration all the way to date. It is only this administration that has made those taxes permanent. And that is why we are unable to even go back to them because the tax burden is high. Personal income, I heard the president talk about 2017 again. No, there was no resolution by any of the assemblies for the carrying tax. And who says that they are not being taxed today? We reduced taxes, but we quickly raised the personal income tax rate. We imposed the additional levies that we're talking about. We even blocked input tax credit on Get Fund and DACF, which was making the production lower, the refund, the VAT refund that they were enjoying. That is an increase, and those are some of the causes of the inflation. Okay. So yes, charity begins from home, and I think we should look at the domestic measures, including not just the expenditure-free SHS, but some of the tax measures that we have been implementing, which has constrained our ability to raise the tax to GDP ratio.
Okay. Gentlemen, to wrap the conversation, I'm going to give you about 40 seconds each. But I'll start with a bit of a premise for you to digest as you sum up everything. Mr. President also says, quote, now that we have seen the worst of the COVID-19, I can tell you that there were moments during those times when I was distraught. There were moments when I was in despair about the apparent inadequacy of our health facilities. And there were moments when I wondered if the dire predictions made about dead bodies on our streets would truly happen. He juxtaposes that with what is happening currently in our economy. And by making that comparison, is Mr. President underestimating the battle ahead? He talks about the battle being the Lord's. And is he being overly optimistic, looking at the realities that we face? 40 seconds each. I'll start with you, Dr. Akakpo. And those will be your final words.
Okay. Well, he's the president. And so I expect my president to be optimistic. I don't expect him to sound any other tone but one of optimism. And so juxtaposing that, I suspect that his point was there were all these dire predictions. It didn't happen. We are going through tough economic times. There may be dire predictions, but we will put in measures to stem off all of those dire predictions. And so, but again,
shouldn't that be laced with reality? Realism?
It has to, but again, like I said, I don't expect my president to sound a tone of doom and gloom, right?
Definitely
because
not.
Then where does that leave citizens? So you need him to sound a tone of optimism that says all of this would work out. Now, when he retires with his ministers and other government officials, then they can deal with the hard questions, the tough policy choices. But in dealing with the public, after admitting that we are in a crisis, he has to show a sense of optimism that says we will get through this. Because if he ends up sounding doom and gloom, what does that do to the rest of us? Citizens, those who invest in the market, all of that. It wouldn't be good.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Akakpo. Thank you. We're really grateful for your time. Let me come to Dr. Appiah. Your take on that, 40 seconds as well?
Right. I think the assurance that there will be no haircut is very, very good. However, the president needs to recognize that he is in a negotiation room with a powerful IMF. What is the take of the IMF? If the IMF walks away, what happens to that optimism? Second, the president should take another look at the free SHS because it is a major contributory factor to our problem. Third, the president should not be overly optimistic that the budget is going to pass quickly without problems. If there is a need to change the minister in order to secure a quick deal in parliament, he needs to do it. And finally,
do you think he should do that? Do you
MMDs
think he should do that? Should he change Ken Ofori-Atta now ahead of the budget rather than what his MPs have agreed to do?
If the IMF deal is partly dependent on securing a budget, then he has no option than to change the minister. Otherwise, as he's a Sikampe Dede, but he's walking into a storm in parliament, he's walking into Dede, that's going to be long and then tough. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those concluding comments, Dr. Appiah. Interesting how he puts it. If some of those things are not done, the president would be walking into Dede noise in Parliament. Seth, you have 40 seconds. Your final words.
Thank you very much. Let me just repeat. Where there was COVID, there was 6 billion, which we should have used to do a collection. Just like banking sector, energy sector debt, there was ESLA. We talk about these things without the government talking about, the resources that were available to help resolve these issues in the case of ESLA collateralized. I agree with, Dan, we do have an IMF. It's not just IMF, but ourselves. We don't have market access. Yes, there is some comfort because government is heavily dependent on the domestic market to finance the budget. Your own business news this morning spoke about auction shortfalls, and we don't want that. But we need to restructure the debt. So what is the alternative? It's very important. It's not just enough to say we are not doing this. And let me repeat, okay, at the risk of repeating, expenditure. It is expenditure, 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 which is leading to the deficit and the borrowing. And if we do not have a very concrete expenditure reduction plan, I don't think that we are going to be able to conclude by the end of the year, which, by the way, what are the timelines? Is it to reach staff level agreement by the end of the year? I think we are even far from that because government is going to be preoccupied between now and December in passing its own budget. When is it going to have time to go and negotiate, do a final negotiation for a staff level agreement? We need those timelines to convince ourselves. Otherwise, we'll be disappointed at the end of the year will come and we do not have agreement on the IMF program.
Right. Well, quite an interesting discussion we've had. Mr. Tekpe, we are grateful for your time. Former Minister for Finance and Economic Planning, Seth Tekpe, there sharing his thoughts. We also had Dr. Daniel Appiah, political governance and public administration expert at the University of Ghana Business School. And also joining the conversation, we had Dr. John Osai Kwapong, a CDD fellow. Gentlemen, thank you so much for having joined us on this conversation.
You're welcome.
Great. And so it's a wrap for this end of the conversation, but still to come, we're definitely going to engage you, of course. We'd love to hear from you. I'm looking at some of the comments that have been coming through, and so many things are going through my mind. But you can have your say with the hashtag AM Show. We'll be taking your comments on social media, and we'll activate the phone lines at the end of the show. So don't you forget to stay with us for that. We'll also be engaging Kwesi Che Dakwa on the real state of Ghana currently, the economy and matters arising. All of that still to come on the AM Show. Do stay. We'll be right back.